This is the story of the ghost ship Flying Dutchman in the modern world, a tale that begins not in the foggy oceans of old, but in the cold humming waters of today's global shipping lanes, where technology and steel reign supreme. But legends never die. It started with a storm, the kind that makes seasoned sailors clutch the rails and mutter old prayers, though most dismiss them as superstition. Captain Elias Monroe had spent over 20 years navigating container ships across the North Sea and the Atlantic, and he had seen almost everything: mechanical failures, rogue waves, and even pirates in the Caribbean. Yet nothing in his career had prepared him for the first sighting of the Flying Dutchman. It was a moonless night, with rain lashing against the bridge windows and lightning fracturing the horizon. The radar screens blinked and hummed, tracking the usual cargo ships and tankers, until something anomalous appeared. A dark silhouette gliding across the waves, unregistered, untraceable, yet eerily precise in its movement. At first, Monroe thought it might be a rogue tanker or a reflection, but as the ship drew closer, its outline became disturbingly clear. A galleon, old-fashioned, massive, black as tar, with tattered sails snapping violently in the storm. The wood looked charred, yet strangely untouched by the rain, and lanterns flickered along the deck, casting an unnatural greenish glow. Monroe's radio crackled to life, though he had expected to hear nothing. Static filled the cabin at first. Then a voice, hollow and distorted, murmured, "Do not cross us, do not follow," before fading into the storm. His crew froze, wide-eyed and pale, convinced that the storm had scrambled the frequencies. Yet the fear in their eyes mirrored Monroe's own. Something about that voice was alive, deliberate, ancient. He tried to call the vessel on all channels, desperate to verify its identity, but every signal bounced back distorted, as though the ship existed outside the normal parameters of the modern world. His GPS began acting erratically, the readings twisting into impossible coordinates, some of them hundreds of miles from anywhere known to man. The storm roared around them, but strangely, the Dutchman moved with eerie ease, slicing through waves that tossed Monroe's ship like a cork. The legend of the Flying Dutchman, a captain cursed to sail the seas forever, never finding port, had always seemed like a story told to frighten sailors. Monroe had scoffed at it just as he scoffed at every maritime ghost story. But now, faced with the impossible, he could feel the legend breathing in the wet, biting air. Every instinct told him to turn away, but curiosity, the kind that had gotten sailors killed for centuries, pushed him forward. Hours passed, or perhaps mere minutes. Time seemed fluid in that storm. The Dutchman was always just over the horizon, disappearing and reappearing, as if teasing them. Then, suddenly, it was alongside. The green lanterns reflected in the water, illuminating ghastly shapes. Figures standing on deck draped in tattered naval uniforms of centuries past, their faces pale, eyes hollow and glowing faintly. They did not move, but their gaze felt like it penetrated the souls of Monroe and his crew. A deafening roar of wind and water filled the cabin. Instruments went haywire. Compasses spun, alarms blared, and phones went dead. Monroe's hand shook as he reached for the ship's log, only to find that it had been erased. Every entry, every previous voyage wiped clean. The storm outside seemed alive, an extension of the Dutchman itself, and a voice whispered again, this time inside Monroe's mind, "Join us. Sail with us. Forever." Panic gripped the crew. Some rushed to the deck, thinking to confront whatever this apparition was, while others huddled, praying in whispers that grew desperate. Monroe knew that approaching the Dutchman could mean death, yet retreat seemed impossible. No matter how fast he steered away, the galleon mirrored every movement, always staying just out of reach, its massive shadow looming over the waves. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the storm ceased. The sea calmed and a strange, unnatural mist rolled over the deck. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, yet through the haze the Dutchman was gone, or so Monroe thought. Then came the knocking. Faint at first, like someone tapping on wood, but gradually growing louder, echoing across the ship's hull. The sound seemed to come from every direction, even inside the captain's cabin. Monroe followed it to the bow, and there, in the swirling mist, he saw a rope ladder descending from nowhere. It swayed gently, beckoning. He hesitated, heart pounding, knowing the stories. Anyone who boarded the Flying Dutchman was lost forever, trapped in a liminal space between life and death. But he was drawn to it, unable to resist the compulsion, as if some invisible hand had reached inside his chest and tugged. Just as he placed his foot on the first rung, a ghostly figure appeared. A man dressed in 17th century sailor garb, hair wild and eyes glowing like embers. He pointed a skeletal finger at Monroe and said, "Do not climb, or you will sail with us. Yet, you have been chosen." Then the figure vanished, leaving only the mist and the chilling sound of the waves. Monroe recoiled, but an eerie calm had settled over him. There was no panic now, only an overwhelming sense of inevitability. Hours, or was it days, passed. The crew began reporting strange visions. Some swore they saw the same sailor, appearing in mirrors, at the helm, even in the engine room. Others described hearing whispers in languages long dead, carried on the faint hiss of wind through the cables. Monroe kept a meticulous log, though it felt futile. The entries seemed to change overnight, recounting things that had never happened, or describing events before they occurred. One entry noted that the ship had crossed into the Bermuda Triangle, but no one had charted that course. The final straw came when the crew's electronics began failing permanently. Phones, tablets, GPS devices, all of them dead. The ship's AIS system stopped broadcasting, and radar only returned images of empty ocean. Yet the Dutchman remained visible in the periphery, a shadow in the fog, moving with impossible speed and precision. Monroe realized with growing horror that they were no longer in the ordinary world. Somehow they had been dragged into a dimension where the Flying Dutchman ruled, where time and space were fluid, and where reality itself bent to the ship's will. Monroe attempted to signal for help through emergency channels, but received only one reply: a static-laden message from an old shipping captain long presumed dead. The voice croaked, "You cannot leave. It has chosen you. The sea is ours." The message cut off abruptly, replaced by the echoing sound of waves and the faint, sinister creak of a ship's timbers in the wind. Then, a series of disappearances began. Crew members vanished without warning. One moment they were at the galley, the next gone, no trace left behind. Personal belongings remained, untouched, but the people themselves were gone. Panic turned to hysteria. The few remaining tried to barricade themselves in the captain's cabin, but even there, the wooden walls seemed alive, pulsing with a dark energy. Shadows twisted along the corners, and every door led back to the deck, where the green lanterns of the Dutchman flickered in the mist, watching, waiting. Monroe could no longer tell if he was awake or dreaming. The storm had returned, or perhaps had never truly left. Rain lashed his face, and lightning illuminated the ghastly deck of the Dutchman. But each strike revealed different horrors: skeletal sailors brandishing cutlasses, ghostly chains clattering, eyes staring from the darkness that should have contained nothing. The air smelled of salt and decay, a pungent reminder that this was no ordinary ship. Desperate, Monroe attempted to throw the ship off course, navigating through jagged rocks that should have ripped their hull apart. Yet the Dutchman mirrored every maneuver, appearing always in front, behind, to the side, a predator that could not be escaped. He began to hear voices in his own head, conversations of sailors long dead, recounting the tale of Captain Hendrik van der Decken, the man cursed to sail forever after defying God and challenging the seas. Monroe realized that the curse had evolved. In the modern world, the Dutchman no longer needed to appear in stormy seas or near Cape of Good Hope. It could manifest anywhere, feeding off fear, technology, and disbelief. As exhaustion overtook him, Monroe had one last thought before darkness claimed him. Perhaps legends were not warnings but invitations. Perhaps the Flying Dutchman had waited centuries for the world to reach a point where disbelief was so strong, the modern sailor would be the perfect prey. And perhaps, Once you saw it, there was no going back, because the Dutchman did not simply haunt the seas, it haunted the very reality around you. When Captain Elias Monroe awoke, it was neither day nor night. The storm had vanished, leaving the ship suspended in a gray, featureless haze that stretched infinitely in every direction. The crew was gone, or at least what remained of them. The few who hadn't vanished were huddled on the bridge, their eyes vacant, voices trembling as they muttered about seeing figures moving in the mist, silhouettes of men in naval uniforms from centuries past. Monroe felt a creeping dread settle in his chest. He realized they had crossed some invisible boundary, a place where the ordinary laws of nature no longer applied. The Dutchman was nowhere in sight, yet its presence was palpable. The air seemed thick, vibrating with a low hum, like a tuning fork struck by invisible hands. Instruments refused to work, compasses spun wildly, and electronic screens displayed fragmented images of the galleon, a glimpse of its tattered sails, the faint glow of its lanterns, a skeletal hand reaching out from the railing. Monroe had no idea how long they had been trapped in this liminal space. Time moved erratically, hours stretching into what felt like days, yet no clock had advanced. He tried to speak, to rally the crew, but words faltered in his throat. Even breathing sounded different, hollow and amplified, as though the mist itself absorbed and twisted sound. Then came the first sighting. A figure appeared at the edge of the deck, glowing faintly green, almost translucent, yet solid enough to cast a shadow. It moved with unnatural fluidity, gliding over the deck rather than walking, and its eyes locked onto Monroe. He recognized the uniform instantly, 17th century Dutch naval attire, but the face beneath it was pale, skeletal, with a grin that made his stomach churn. "Captain Monroe," the figure whispered, the voice echoing inside his mind, bypassing ears entirely. "You are chosen to witness the fate of those who dare to chase the Dutchman. Will you join us, or will you resist?" Monroe wanted to resist. He wanted to turn away, to abandon the bridge and flee into the mist, yet his feet felt rooted to the deck. A compulsion, as ancient as the seas themselves, held him in place. The figure extended a hand, long and bony, and for a moment, Monroe saw something in its eyes. Not malice, but an impossible, eternal longing. Then it vanished, leaving only a faint echo of its laughter that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The crew's condition deteriorated rapidly. Hunger and thirst were replaced by a more insidious decay. Hallucinations, memory lapses, and whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. One by one, they disappeared, leaving Monroe alone on the bridge, staring into the gray expanse. He began to see them again, not in the flesh but as echoes, ghostly apparitions performing mundane tasks, walking, talking, laughing, as if their lives had continued in some parallel, cursed reality. Days, or what felt like days, passed in this void. Monroe experimented, trying to navigate the ship to force it to change course, but the Dutchman's influence warped reality itself. Instruments failed, engines refused to respond, and every decision seemed preordained, as though the ship were a living entity, anticipating his moves, guiding him into inevitability. At one point, he tried to abandon the bridge entirely, descending into the lower decks, only to find corridors that led nowhere, stairs that ended in walls, cabins that repeated themselves endlessly. It was a labyrinth of wood and shadow, a prison designed to break the mind. Then came the whispers. Not one voice, but hundreds layered over each other, speaking languages both familiar and dead. They told stories of sailors who had vanished, of cursed treasure, of storms that would never end. Monroe could not shut them out. They penetrated his very thoughts, twisting his perception. Shadows began to move independently, curling along the walls, stretching like black smoke, forming shapes that suggested hands, faces, and weapons. He realized the Dutchman was not just a ship. It was a living embodiment of the curse, feeding on fear, disbelief, and the fragile thread of human sanity. One night, in what might have been the equivalent of midnight, Monroe found himself on deck, staring into a churning sea that reflected the gray sky in perfect, unsettling symmetry. There, emerging from the mist, was the Flying Dutchman itself. Its sails were shredded, yet it glided effortlessly, its hull blackened and scarred, yet intact. Figures moved along its deck, identical to those Monroe had seen in visions. Sailors, pale and hollow-eyed, performing duties in a silence that spoke louder than words. The green lanterns flickered, casting their otherworldly glow across the mist, illuminating shapes that seemed almost alive. The Dutchman drifted closer but did not engage. Monroe realized with dawning horror that the ship existed in a state outside the physical world. It was a ghost, yes, but more than that. A node of some ancient power, a tether between life and death. He understood why no technology could detect it. It did not occupy the same space as reality, at least not entirely. It could manifest, manipulate, and vanish at will, yet its purpose remained inscrutable. Driven by a combination of fear and obsessive curiosity, Monroe climbed the mast to get a better view, risking the collapse of the rigging beneath him. From that height he saw not just the Dutchman, but a vast expanse of ships, real and spectral, floating in the gray void, all vessels lost to the same curse, their crews echoes of their former lives. He realized the Dutchman had not appeared in the modern world by chance. It was gathering, consolidating, feeding on every vessel that dared approach, every mind that dared to believe or disbelieve. Below, the remaining crew began to behave erratically. Some spoke in tongues, others screamed at invisible threats, and a few simply sat, staring into nothing, muttering numbers, names, dates that meant nothing, yet carried a terrible weight. Monroe tried to guide them, to anchor their sanity with reason and orders, but he could feel the curse spreading, an invisible current that sapped their will and replaced it with something alien, patient, eternal. Then came the first direct interaction. From the mist, a rope ladder descended, swaying gently in an invisible wind. Monroe knew what it meant, an invitation or a trap. He saw a sailor, skeletal and grinning, beckoning him. The whispers grew louder, overlapping with the roar of the sea, telling him to climb, to join the Dutchman, to embrace the curse and leave the mortal world behind. His hands trembled as he reached for the ladder, feeling the pull of the ship, a force both magnetic and malevolent. Something inside him resisted. Memories of home, of sunlight, of the world beyond the fog surged unexpectedly. He hesitated, and for a fleeting moment he felt control. But the Dutchman was patient. It had been sailing for centuries, awaiting souls who wavered, who thought they could resist. The sailor's grin widened, eyes burning like coals, and Monroe realized that hesitation was futile. The ship did not merely ask. It demanded compliance, bending reality until resistance became impossible. He was about to descend when a sudden explosion of light ripped through the mist. The green glow of the Dutchman flickered violently, revealing glimpses of the ocean beyond the gray void, waves crashing against a moonlit horizon. Monroe fell to his knees, gasping, and the vision vanished as quickly as it appeared. The rope ladder swayed empty. The sailor's grin dissolved into smoke. For a moment, Monroe thought he had been given a reprieve, a chance to escape. But the reprieve was deceptive. The voices continued, whispering in every corner, every shadow, and every heartbeat. The Dutchman had not released him. It had merely shifted the moment, prolonging the inevitable. Monroe realized the horrifying truth. There was no escape, not in time, not in space. The ship was eternal, and so was its curse. Any notion of salvation was an illusion, a cruel trick to deepen despair before the final claim. In a desperate bid, Monroe attempted to send a distress signal using the last functioning radio equipment. He spoke plainly, detailing the ship, the curse, the inexplicable phenomena. But when the transmission ended, it came back distorted, reversed, and overlaid with laughter. The Dutchman had intercepted the signal, warped it, and sent it back, a warning and a taunt to any who might come looking. Monroe understood then that the world would hear of nothing. The legend would survive, but no living person would bear witness to the truth. As the gray haze closed in again, Monroe made one final decision. He would confront the Dutchman on his own terms. He took the rope ladder and climbed, ignoring the cold, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the pull that sought to consume his will. With each step, the mist thickened, the world bending around him, until he felt himself standing on the spectral deck of the Flying Dutchman. Figures surrounded him, silent and watching, yet their eyes burned with unholy fire. The captain of the Dutchman, Hendrik van der Decken himself, or at least the ghostly embodiment of him, appeared. He was massive, more shadow than flesh, yet every detail of his cursed visage was clear. The tattered uniform, the skeletal hand, the eyes that seemed to pierce centuries of souls. Van der Decken spoke in a voice that resonated with the roar of the ocean, yet carried a chill that froze the blood. "You have come and now you are mine. You sail forever as all who see me do. But your spirit burns bright, mortal. Perhaps you will learn what centuries cannot teach." Monroe felt the pull again, stronger than before, a force that threatened to tear him from reality entirely. Yet something inside him clung to life, to memory, to the fleeting hope of escape. The deck shifted beneath his feet, the sea roared without sound, and the veil between worlds trembled. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything went black. Elias Monroe awoke to silence. The gray haze, the whispers, and the storm had vanished, replaced by a stillness so profound it pressed against his ears. For a moment he thought he had returned to the mortal world, that the nightmare of the Dutchman was over. He looked around, the bridge of his ship intact, the familiar hum of engines, the soft blink of radar screens. Relief surged through him, but it was fragile, tempered by the uneasy feeling that something was different. The crew appeared as if nothing had happened. They moved about with mechanical precision, faces pale but not vacant, whispering amongst themselves about their duties. Monroe's heart sank. Something was wrong. The logs, instruments, and GPS were all functioning, yet their entries bore no record of the storm, no trace of the mist, no explanation for the anomalies he had witnessed. It was as if the Dutchman had never existed, except in Monroe's mind. He tried to speak to the crew, but their responses were flat, rehearsed, devoid of the urgency and fear he expected. Even the weather outside seemed muted, the sea unusually calm, the sky an antiseptic gray. A creeping suspicion began to take root. Perhaps the Dutchman had not released them. Perhaps it had let them return to the surface world, only to remain hidden in the folds of reality, always watching, always waiting. The first sign came as a subtle vibration underfoot, a rhythm too regular to be natural, like a heartbeat echoing from beneath the hull. Then from the corner of his eye, Monroe saw movement on the water. Faint, flickering shapes too distant to be ordinary vessels, too coordinated to be whales or debris. Lanterns, greenish in hue, glimmered briefly on the waves. The Dutchman was there, just beyond perception, playing with them like a predator with prey. Over the following days, Monroe noticed more subtle disturbances. The crew began muttering numbers and dates they couldn't possibly know. Shadows stretched unnaturally, seeming to anticipate movement rather than follow it. Instruments occasionally froze on impossible readings. A compass spinning clockwise, then reversing. GPS coordinates pointing to empty ocean regions. Radar blips vanishing and reappearing as if existing in multiple places at once. It was a reality subtly warped by a force beyond comprehension. One night, while alone on the bridge, Monroe heard the whispers return, at first faint, unintelligible, like the rustling of paper. Then clearer, almost conversational. "You cannot hide. You will join us. You will see." The voice was layered, ancient and young, male and female, blending into a choir of endless souls. His stomach churned, and he realized with horror that the Dutchman had followed him back to the ordinary world. Not physically, but metaphysically. It had planted itself inside the edges of reality, in the invisible currents between perception and truth. He tried to contact authorities to warn them, but each transmission returned distorted. Emails sent to maritime agencies arrived corrupted, garbled, or reversed. Radar stations reported nothing out of the ordinary. To the outside world, Monroe and his ship were simply safe in a calm, empty stretch of ocean. To Monroe, however, the Dutchman existed in every reflection, every shadow, every whisper of wind through the rigging. The turning point came when he ventured onto the deck one evening. The sun was setting, casting long silver beams across the water. At first, all seemed calm, but then the fog rolled in, unnatural and thick, obscuring the horizon. And there it was, the Flying Dutchman, emerging from nothing, spectral and immense. Its sails were shredded, yet it moved with unerring precision. Figures lined the rails, their skeletal faces staring into his soul. The green lanterns flickered, illuminating shapes that suggested both life and death, fear and longing. A skeletal hand reached toward him, not violently, but with insistent purpose. The whispers filled his mind. "Join us, mortal. Leave the fleeting world. Sail forever." Monroe's legs trembled, but he did not move. He had come to understand the Dutchman's true nature. It did not merely claim sailors, it trapped their minds, bending perception until reality itself conformed to its will. The storm, the mist, the vanished crew, all were facets of the same curse, manifestations of a power that fed on fear, obsession, and the fragile thread of human sanity. For hours that felt like centuries, he stood on the deck staring at the galleon. Then came a vision, not through the eyes, but through the mind. He saw other ships, other crews, lost to the Dutchman across centuries. Explorers, merchants, navies, and freighters. He saw the patterns of their fates, the way reality had folded around them, how they became echoes, shadows, warnings for those who followed. Monroe realized the horrifying truth. The Flying Dutchman was not bound by time or space. It existed in every era, in every ocean, waiting for moments when disbelief would make men vulnerable, and when technology could no longer shield them from the old, relentless curse. A voice clearer than ever pierced his thoughts. "You are the witness, Monroe. You will tell the world what it cannot see. But beware. Seeing is a choice, and the choice is never free." Monroe understood. He had survived, yet the Dutchman had claimed something deeper. His certainty, his grasp on the ordinary world. Every decision he made now, every step, could be manipulated. Every shadow, every reflection, might be the Dutchman's doing. He was free to act, but always under observation, a marionette in an unseen ship's deck. In the weeks that followed, Monroe attempted to document his experience, keeping meticulous records in a journal and digital files. Yet each time he revisited them, anomalies appeared. Entries changed. New words appeared in languages he could not read. Timestamps misaligned, and photographs taken of the sea sometimes revealed figures standing on deck, pale, skeletal, staring directly at the lens. It was impossible to prove to anyone else that the Dutchman existed in the modern world, but Monroe could not escape the certainty that it did. Then the disappearances began in the real world. Ships reported missing crews, cargo vessels found abandoned with no trace of struggle, sailors claiming strange sightings, only to vanish before investigations could begin. Newspapers printed stories of phantom ships and unexplained vanishings, but by the time authorities arrived, no evidence remained. Monroe realized that the Dutchman had extended its reach beyond the misty void, beyond the gray haze, into the minds, lives, and perceptions of the living world. Monroe's sleep became a battleground. He dreamed of the galleon, its tattered sails cutting through oceans of fog and fire, figures lining its rails, waiting, always waiting. He awoke screaming, only to find the deck of his own ship silent and empty. The line between dream and reality blurred. He could no longer tell if he had fallen asleep or if the Dutchman was testing him, drawing him into its eternal narrative. In a moment of clarity, he decided to confront it, not with weapons, not with radios, not with logic, but with presence. He stood on deck, alone, and called out, voice echoing over the empty sea. "I see you. I know what you are." The mist thickened, the green lanterns flickered, and the Dutchman emerged closer. spectral forms rising along its rails. Its captain, Hendrik van der Decken, appeared, towering, skeletal, yet majestic in a terrifying way. "You see, mortal," van der Decken whispered, "and in seeing you bind yourself to the curse. You will carry the knowledge, and through you others may glimpse what should not be glimpsed. But beware, the price of knowledge is eternal vigilance." The ship dissolved into mist, leaving only echoes and ripples on the water. Monroe felt an emptiness in his chest, a vacuum where certainty once lived. He was alive, but the world would never be the same. Every shadow, every ship on the horizon, every whisper of wind reminded him of the Dutchman's reach. He had survived, but he had also been marked. Years later, Captain Monroe's story circulated quietly among mariners. An oral legend whispered in port towns, a cautionary tale. The Flying Dutchman had returned, more powerful than ever, and it existed not only in storms or fogs, but in the very perception of those who dared sail the seas. Some dismissed it as fantasy, yet those who had seen the green lanterns or heard the whispers in the wind knew better. Monroe himself continued to sail, a shadow among sailors, keeping meticulous logs that no one else could interpret, always alert to anomalies, always aware that reality was never fixed. He understood the truth. The Dutchman did not merely haunt the seas, it haunted the modern world, waiting for skepticism to falter, for curiosity to override caution. It had adapted, evolving with time, a ghost ship unbound by centuries, unbound by reason, a living nightmare tethered to the human mind. And sometimes, when the night is black and the sea is calm, a green light flickers on the horizon. A ship appears, tattered, spectral, slicing through waves as if they were air. It is the Flying Dutchman, eternal, patient, waiting for those who dare to witness it. And if you see it, beware. The Dutchman is always watching, and once it has your gaze, it may never release you. For Captain Monroe and countless others, life is a shadow of the truth, a fragile veil between the ordinary world and the eternal curse of the Flying Dutchman. And so the legend sails on, not just in stories, but in the very currents of the sea, in the mist that curls around modern vessels, and in the minds of those who have glimpsed the impossible. The ghost ship lives, unseen but ever present, a reminder that some legends never die. They simply evolve, haunting the world in ways we are only beginning to understand. And as the waves crash silently beneath a moonless sky, one truth remains. The Flying Dutchman is out there, waiting, patient, eternal, and the modern world is no longer immune to its curse. The story of the Flying Dutchman has returned, not as a tale of old, but as a modern nightmare proving that some ghosts never rest and some curses never end.